I came to CSU in 1979 as a instructor, a temporary instructor, and I stayed. Who thought I would stay forever? But I taught my first years here, and I did take a few leaves to go back to industry. I sort of went up through the ranks and became the department head in pretty short order, and did that for 10 years. And then I went into the to the dean's office. So I loved every part of that. The administrative as well as the teaching. Not always easy years in administration, because we had some years of the flood and tough financial situations, etc. But I would honestly say I loved every part of it, and did the best I could in the tough situations that we had. So, and Dean's office, working with all the departments and all the different areas on campus, was really exciting. I retired in 2006, and I had been in the dean's office and had really enjoyed that, but was working part-time because of some medical issues. And so my focus for quite some time was getting back to being healthy and balanced. And in recent years, Jerry and I enjoy golfing, and we enjoy volunteering, and we do travel a lot. So it's hard to do a lot of volunteering on boards that you have to be around 12 months out of the year. So I'm on the Senior Scholars Board. I've kept some things that I'm doing with thrift stores. I love to do that. I think that's a big part of what I enjoy doing, because I like to see people repurpose things, and I just like the philosophy of what's going on there. Some church activities, and we both enjoy reading and swimming, walking, so just enjoying life. We have a rather large family. Jerry and I have 8 nieces and nephews and 20 great nieces and nephews. And my father's will be 91 this year, so we do a lot of things for and with Dad and Gwen. So we are really, most of the time we're here in the summer, we're all over the place, visiting people, catching up with friends, and doing what we can to be involved in the community while we're here. What influenced me to go into higher ed? I don't know in my growing up life that I ever would have thought I would have been anything in education or teaching. It wasn't that I love school, but I love school because of the extracurricular activities. I did a lot of first girl things, the first president of my school, and I just did a lot of firsts for a young girl. And I actually was a congressional intern too. And I thought I wanted to be an attorney. And after that experience, I just thought, I don't want to go into law. I knew that. So I started school, and I had done a lot in my growing up years in retail or with my dad in business. And he provided me opportunities to do everything within business. I did everything from accounting to customer service, and I traveled a lot with him. And in my coursework, my instructors, there were not very many classes in retailing or anything, but there was one instructor who was also really good friends with the dean, and she just kept saying to me, "How do you know all this stuff? How do you know what's going on in these?" And I said, "Well, I grew up with it, and it just is sort of second nature." And so when I finished my undergraduate education, which I did in 3 years, and then I took 2 courses in the fall along with graduate courses, and I just did that because I needed to have at least 12 credits, and I was president of a couple of groups, and so I had to stay till December. So I thought, well, I'll do the graduate work. And when I finished that semester, I got a call from the dean, and she said, would you come back to graduate school and help us develop a merchandising program? So I really didn't have another game plan at the time. I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but I went back and did graduate work, got my master's, and then I ended up teaching there at University of Nebraska for 4 years before coming to CSU. So it wasn't a thoughtful plan in terms of thinking this was my forte, but I found I loved it. I think in growing up in a family where you have all 4 grandparents that came over as teenagers, as immigrants, there was just a real strong work ethic. So in growing up, it was just our way of life. I mean, we always were busy and doing something. Even after school, my brother and I would go down to my dad's, to the dry cleaners and work, and there were all sorts of jobs that had to be done. You know, shirts used to come in these boxes, and somebody had to make those boxes and put the little, tissue things over the hangers and all that. So those were some of our first jobs, but it was just part of our life. And then when we got home at night, we didn't do the TV thing or anything really. A lot of families didn't have TV for one thing, but we were always involved in activities. And so, and we had to do our homework, and so that's just sort of our life. And even on the weekend, we had a family cabin, and we would go there, but we had our chores in the morning to do, and then we could play in the afternoon. So when I went to college, I worked while I was going to school, and I still finished early because in the summer I would go back to my hometown and take credits. And when I was a graduate student, my husband and I were house parents. I had an assistantship, and I worked a retail job. So I think when you grow up that way, you don't think, anything of it. You think it's normal, and it was great. It got me, I was able to accomplish a lot in life at a young age due to that work ethic. So I owe them a lot. A lot of people don't think, when they think design, they're thinking fashion and everything, but to be a real successful retailer, you have to know the business side of things. And when I first taught at Nebraska, we had a math course that I was teaching, and I'd had students work a lot of problems, and of course that meant grading all those problems. So my graduate students would help me, or then eventually my undergraduates, my seniors, and so we were doing all this manually. And when computers first came out, there was an incentive for faculty if they could figure out a way to use them. So a friend and I started writing programs that were more of drill and practice. So it would have the product name would change, and the price would change, and the markup would change, and so students would have to solve the problem, and then the computer would grade it for us. And at that time, the computers had no screen. It was just a typewriter-looking thing, and we did the programming. Ultimately, that's evolved over time. But when I came to, my students in Nebraska thought I should get this into a book form. But at that time, nobody had ever heard of publishing books with software. So when I came to Colorado, we didn't even have computers here, and we had no computer labs or anything. And so that was a real big endeavor at that time, was how do we even start getting a few, and so ultimately, my goodness, that's changed tremendously over time. So, but the computer aspect, I think, was huge in my life, because not only did we have this drill and practice, problem solving with students. But it became a personal interest to me because at that time retailers didn't have them either, neither small nor large retailers. So when I was away working on my doctorate, a company identified me because I was doing lectures at the markets and everything for my assistantship. And they said, would you come and help us develop a system, a turnkey system? So that was another one of my leaves as soon as I finished graduate school, was to go and work for a company to help develop a product like that. And because of that, then we were able to bring that product and others into the classroom for teaching purposes. So I would say that's probably a big thing in my life, was having the evolution of all this teaching material and methods of teaching using computers. And of course, it always keeps changing. I could no longer do the programming for it. So we've done different editions of the book, but it's still hard for publishers to understand that you want to publish something with software and why you think that's important. I couldn't in any way continue to do that without a real strong programmer anymore, but I do the math side of it. But so that was, it can play into many things now, but it certainly has evolved tremendously from the beginnings of nothing. Math and computers changed the discipline of merchandising because I think it made it a little bit more sophisticated and a little more in tune with what was happening in the rest of the business world. Because before that time, the social psych aspects were important, the historic costume was important, textiles, but this business thing was a whole new thing. So we had lots of instructors or teachers who were interested in the other areas, but nobody really was versed in business. So what was happening is a lot of these people from the other disciplines were coming to teach merchandising, and they had no business background whatsoever. So there really had to be something that sort of brought people into the current age and were providing the opportunity for our students to be competitive when they went out to the field. That's what they would be encountering. And so it really was imperative. And then after we started doing that with merchandising, we started getting into it more and more with design. But a lot of it is so expensive. That's why not every institution could afford to do it and had the skills to do it. So that's one of the things that makes CSU very unique, I think, is that they have that capability, and not every school can afford to do that. In retrospect, I think either students really liked my style, or in some cases they probably thought it was a little unusual, because I was one to really stress real world experiences, and I also felt like I could help each student more the more I knew about them, and the more I could see how they operated. So a lot of my emphasis in teaching was not in true false and multiple choice questions, but it was more in case studies and using trade papers and publications as part of my curriculum. There weren't a lot of books available at the time either that were truly based on industry standards or industry information. And as the students would go into internships, which I strongly not only supported but developed, they would bring back information for me too. So they would write case studies. I would ask them to identify a problem and then figure out a solution and tell me what happened with it. And so a lot of those I ended up infusing back in my courses. The internships to me were absolutely imperative, and there were so many experiences that I was able to enjoy with the students, because I would go visit them and then they would share with me what they were doing, and I would get to meet the people they're working with. And in preparing for this, I I remember I found the book that Stanley Marcus autographed for me, and Mr. Blackwell, and people I never would have imagined I would encounter in life or have it be a part of my life. But the student experiences, I think, for almost everybody, a majority of the students were given an opportunity to go ahead and work where they had done an internship. So my classes and courses probably were a little different because there was not a lot of memorization so much as being able to think on your feet and being able to be creative with the resources you had, and being able to interpret the news in terms of what would you do with this, you were faced with this situation. And it for me was a more realistic way to teach in that particular discipline. So that probably also impacted my advising, because I was always looking for what is another way that the student could develop personally and professionally, what would be the best options for them, looking for opportunities for growth. I would say anything that was more experiential would have been, my personal preference and sort of what I endeavored to develop. Well, hobbies versus living, that's interesting. When I say, I think a lot of people end up in merchandising, or because I like fashion, I like clothes, so I'll go into this field, and they have no idea what they're getting into. And that's why the exposure to, whether it's shadowing somebody or doing an internship, I think is real helpful. But for me personally, I know I was always in design classes because that's what was happening at the time, was design, not merchandising. And I realized pretty quick I enjoyed it, but I couldn't imagine how I was going to make a living with this. Yet, I think you have to be pretty talented to do that. And I enjoyed the aesthetics of it, but I thought, how would I ever make a living doing this? And then I realized that I had probably a talent and an aptitude to do something else that I never even thought of. I wouldn't have said math and computers, and that's what my forte is going to be, but it just sort of happens. So I think the same thing happens with students, where if you find something that's really easy for you to do, you might assume that everybody else can do it. And reality is probably not everybody else can do it. So I would always tell students, if people keep saying you're really good at this or you really have a talent for this, listen to that, because that could guide you into something that you could enjoy for the rest of your life. And they'd say, well, this isn't very hard to do. Well, are you having fun with it? Are you enjoying it? I can't imagine not enjoying what you do almost every day of your life. That if you are fortunate enough to have something that you do professionally that you love, it doesn't feel like work. I mean, we all have stressors in our day, but for the most part. So I think it's important to sort of look at that whole picture and figure out where you can make the contribution and what you enjoy. And my favorite parts of working with students is, just to be honest, the working with students part is the teaching part is great. I did 15 years of administration, and the further I got away from working with the students, I love working with the faculty too, but it is a whole different range of activities. And for me, my teaching years were early on in my career, when I wasn't too far apart in age from many of the students. So a lot of the activities that we engaged in, I had a lot of energy for, and I think working with young people does take a lot of energy, but it was part of what made it fun for me, and I think and fun for them, because we were the first ones to get a New York study tour, or a study tour on record for credit, and it was the New York tour. And so we set up a program for the week where they would visit professionals, and they could do interviews, and we love that. did that. We did that every other year for almost the whole time that I was at CSU. So that was a great opportunity, because again, you could see how the students interacted with professionals. You could help them with interview techniques. You could help direct them toward areas that they might have an interest in. So it wasn't just the classroom. For me, it was far beyond that. We had programs. We started working at the Denver Mart, where businesses would come in with their questions and take students down, and we'd meet in small groups and help address their problems. So again, it goes back to that engagement with the professional world that for me was, I would bring speakers in or professionals in to talk with the students about what they were doing, and for students to give them an opportunity to interact. And but those kinds of things do take an awful lot of energy to organize and to implement, because we did service learning. Not just AmeriCorps, but service learning in the classroom, and it does, I think, pay off in a great way for students to figure out what it is they are good at and what it is they do enjoy, because a lot of the career areas are, we can see the surface of a job, but in any job, there's all this underlying stuff nobody ever knows about until you get out there and see it. So I enjoyed those things. The other thing is that you can develop something even as an administrator, but if the faculty doesn't want to go along and do it, or a lot of the programs that we developed aren't there anymore. And it's, there's got to be a champion. And we organized, I'd forgotten things about, we had this thing called Designs for Living that was part of the Mary Scott Lecture Series. And it was 6 weeks of something design-oriented every single day in the community. And that took a lot of work to do. But it was to try to sort of bring people's awareness to all the things that were design-related, but it also sort of helped promote what was going on in the department, and highlight different faculty, and we did Champions for Design that was bringing young people into that had 4-Hers who had accomplished a lot, bringing them into campus to show them what was going on campus, but also highlighting them for what they had accomplished. But a lot of those programs are gone now. One of the biggest gifts, the biggest gift CSU ever got at the time, the Electra software was like over $3 million, and that was a big deal because there weren't very many design programs that had that kind of software, and it provided such great opportunities for our students, and so that was like a real feather in our cap. And we also had programs where we had one that we called CoLink that was linking our students with people in the community with needs. We did this for interior design and for apparel design and merchandising. So a company could come to us and say, we want a new logo, or we aren't sure what next product we want to develop, or we've got this technical problem with something we're trying to create. It's a textile issue. And so we'd organize a little team around that problem solving. And it was a fee-for-service situation. So there was always a coordinator who helped get the students and the business person together and figure out the solution, and they were paid for what the work they did. The interior designers did layouts. It could be someone's home, it could have been a project at CSU, and so that was another way. It provided salary for people involved, and it gave students a great experience. We also organized a futuring conference for our profession on the international level. We had the International Textile and Apparel Association. I'd been president of that group, and they were entering a new planning stage, and we did strategic planning for that and invited a group of people to CSU and helped them do futuring, and that was really really fun to do. And I like those kinds of things. I did a couple of presentations for that group on future thinking because it was related to technology, and I always love to think of the technology piece. And I remember one of the things I talked about was 3D imaging, and of course recently on the news there's been a lot of things about 3D imaging and developing 3Ds out of a faxing something and having it build as a 3D model. But when I was talking about it 20 years ago, people look at me like, oh, you're, what's she thinking? So, but those were all there probably was a technology piece to all that, but also a future piece that I always enjoyed. I'm not one that's fearful of change, and I think it's inevitable. And I do try to keep up on things like that now because, I think it's part of the world we live in. It's just coming faster. In terms of things one does, I think, at least for me, I forget about a lot of things that I'd done, but I looked at a list of roles and responsibilities the other day and I started laughing at, oh my goodness, there are a lot of things that you're involved in as a department head or as an associate dean that I'm sure other people have no idea, that you're involved with. And one of the things that when the academic village conversation came up, it was difficult to tell people what it was and that it was important to try to get on board with it because nobody thought it would happen. And it seemed like a sort of far out there concept, but it was something that it was sure fun to work on and to envision and now to see it happen. And the early conversation about integrating an environment with a major so you could sort of see what was going on in your major, I think was, again, sort of a new frontier. And it was exciting to think about what would you really want if you were in a situation like that. So I'm glad it's sort of coming about, and we'll see if there's more of that. I think, another thing that I spent an awful lot of time with, which I think the faculty probably didn't appreciate so much, but was all the stuff we had to do for outcomes assessment, which was a huge project for everyone. But somebody had to take charge of it and run it, have oversight. Another one that I think Nancy Hartley and I are both really proud of is the AmeriCorps involvement, because AmeriCorps sort of was unknown on campus, and we got a call to sort of get involved with that, and philosophically it fit with us, and it certainly fit with me because it would allow students to engage in the community and nonprofits and to use their background, but in a way that would help others, and to get credit for it, to get paid for it. I mean, that's unreal. So we seized that opportunity, but that also was sort of a new frontier, and people were not quite sure what it was and why would we want to get involved in this or whatever. But Dean Hartley was supportive of it, and I enjoyed serving on that board and working with the group to see that more and more of it would happen. And I remember when we started with 5 students and then went to 50, and then I think it was 107, and now I heard this 650,000 or something coming in to CSU because of that. So so that's fun to see. So there are lots of experiences that I had almost forgotten. I did accounting for Maury Albertson for when the Peace Corps, very, very early on in that development. But he had a company with engineering students, and I did accounting for them early on, or when I first came to Colorado. Well, I think the faculty and I were very fortunate because there were lots of awards that sort of came our way, and I think whenever any one person receives those, it's not really one person, and that's why I think a lot of the awards I got were team efforts, and so I want to acknowledge that. But for me, the ones that certainly any of the service awards I feel very proud of, because that's sort of what I think it's all about, not only at CSU, but in life in general, is serving other people or helping other people. That's I think a major role, or how I see myself as more of a servant, if you will. But I think as a group, one of the things that we're really proud of was getting the American Textile Manufacturers Institute Award for Program of Excellence, and it was chosen from an international group of undergraduate programs, and our area won that, and it was a real group effort, and something, growing from not really having a merchandising program, or having a very small one, to being recognized internationally for having a program of excellence was a big deal for us. And I look at the three missions, the teaching, the research, and the service, and I think I was fortunate to get a couple of teaching awards, and certainly got a lot of service awards, and even a couple of outstanding paper awards. And I think, well, there was good balance in that. But I think the ones from your colleagues mean a lot too. So the Margaret Hazalius Award, I knew Margaret, and it was acknowledging work with women and Women's Caucus, and so that was special. And then the Oliver Pinnock Award, I think, is because it's university-wide, and again, it's for service. So I've been really fortunate to have some acknowledgement. We always used to say to students, pat yourself on the back, because it may be the only acknowledgement you get within your day or the week. So get to do that. So it was nice to have it from somebody else other than yourself. In terms of colleagues that helped me, as I thought about that question, I thought, oh my gosh, there are more people than I could name. So I always hate to leave anybody out. But my first professor I worked with at Nebraska was Rob Hillstead, and Rob is just sort of like a legend now. But the big thing for me is I came in as a business person, and he was a design person. So he taught me a lot about design and appreciating design, and that has really helped me throughout my career as I worked with people in the unit that were design oriented. So I give him a lot of credit for the patience he had. He's an outstanding man. When I was hired at CSU, I was hired by Rex Richards, and Rex was a textile person, and so Rex had faith in me. I was a last-minute hire, and I say that because the person who was supposed to take the job was in an accident in coming to it, so it was sort of a fluke, and it was supposed to be a temporary thing. But after the first year, he hired me as an assistant professor, and so I appreciate the fact that he sort of acknowledged that he thought I had potential. And I give a lot of credit to Dean McHugh as well, because the two of them really did a lot to orchestrate my professional development, which I didn't even realize. But the first week I was working with them, I thought, I'm not going to have a job at all. And it was because we got a call from somebody higher up in the university, and there was a complaint about something that I had done. And what had happened is CSU was given a collection, the Probstein collection of undergarments, intimate apparel for women. And they asked me if I would, and my students would go do a display over in the library. So I had the students do, renderings of what they were going to do and everything, and they went and implemented them. And so we get this call. So Helen McHugh calls Rex Richards, and we all gather and parade over to the library to see this complaint. What has happened here? And I'm thinking, well, I thought, I approved the ideas, etc. They looked at them and said, well, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. We don't understand what the complaint is. They're tastefully done. It's, their explanations of these things. We just don't see the problem. And apparently some of the women were upset about it. And then they said, well, there's no male garments here. And they said, well, if you give us any, we'll display them as well. So that was my week, my starting week with them. I just thought, oh my gosh, I could lose my job. But so they supported me leaving and going, completing a PhD, and then holding my job to allow me to go to work with the computer company and work on the computer development for retailers, and then holding that position for me to come back. And when I think of other people too, I think of Karen Covington, who was here when I got here, the only other merchandising person there was, who introduced me to a lot of people in industry that helped me, make inroads. I think of Sally Haxton, who was like the mom for every kid. She was the one who guided internships at the time, and I learned from her. After Sally passed away, I took over the internships, and she and I did the New York study tour together. So she was a gem. Lots of people that are in the retired now, that Pat Wilson and Jen Else and Doris Heim, there are just so many, because all those awards and everything, it was really a group effort. I also think of people who were younger than me. Soyan Shim came, and oh my goodness, she had such a work ethic, and it overcame language barriers and was the hardest worker I'd ever, but we did a lot of publishing together, and she was an outstanding researcher. And she was only here 4 years, but we are lifelong friends. And so really everything. I think my students oftentimes are people who've helped me professionally as well too, because as they became professionals, we maintained our friendship, and I continue to learn from them. So. Well, I think if I had any advice, right, for anybody trying to determine what they might do in life, I think it's so important to explore as many options as you can, and to really find something that makes your heart sing, and that you enjoy going to work every day and doing what you're doing. But I often think that for young people now, I think it's a big challenge, because a lot of things are very tight, and it's much harder, I think, for people to get in. Certainly in the retail world, we used to have a lot of small companies, and now there's so many big ones. So it's hard to go in at ground level on some of these, and in a bigger corporation. But I truly think just a lot of the really basics will carry people a long ways. I would have speakers come to the classroom, and later they'd say, who is that student in the second row? They ask great questions, and I want to interview them. So I think showing up, being attentive, asking good questions, being part of the process, that people underestimate how much attention people pay to those situations. I remember my father used to go into a restaurant, and if he had a really good service person, he'd probably try to hire him away. It's like the way that you find good people. So I don't always think you have to be the sharpest knife in the drawer, or, you know, but I think being persistent about something you're interested in, and just having the ambition to explore options and to leave all the doors open, and being willing to have some failures. It's okay if you explore something and it's not quite what you thought and what you wanted to do. They're downsides of probably every single job, and we rarely hear about those. But being exposed to those and saying, you know, it's okay if you want to do that. You know, Jerry, my husband, was a golf professional, and his nephews would say, I want to do that. And I'd say, really? Do you like flipping hamburgers and cleaning toilets? And they'd look at me, and that's a part of the job you don't generally see. You know, so there's something in every job that you may not like, but if the bulk is what you see and love, I would pursue it. There are a lot of people that I know, a lot of women that love yarns and love knitting and everything, and they want to open a business. Well, once they open the business, you have no time for that. You're not able to develop, you know, the part of the process that you enjoy. You aren't doing. You're running the business. So, I think, you know, there are a lot of lessons to be learned by exploring something and saying, oh, that's not for me. It's worthwhile. Well, all I'd like to say is that I have appreciation for the college for doing this, because I think the history and heritage is so important. So I want to express that appreciation. And to any of my friends whose names I didn't acknowledge, I apologize for that. But to former students, I would just love to hear from you. And if the contact information provided, I now have the time. Some of you have written to me, and I probably didn't get back to you right away, but I now have the time and energy, and would just really love to hear from you and your stories. And I know many of you have stayed in the field, and some not, but I'd still enjoy hearing from you. So I wish everyone well. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts and to just say hello to everyone.